Welcome to the EI Guru podcast, a podcast completely focused on emotional intelligence. Typically, the first question I get is, what is emotional intelligence? In very simple terms, it's how we manage our emotions in our interactions with ourselves and others. Or put another way, it's being in the right state and not being in a state when under pressure. Emotional intelligence is another label for mindset, and we all know that when navigating those important conversations, we need to tap into our best. I'll be interviewing leaders and experts in this ever-expanding field and sharing the data on why emotional intelligence is the difference that makes the difference in all of our relationships. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. Welcome to the latest episode of the EI Guru. I'm delighted to be joined this week by Ian Eggs, who I have worked with previously some years ago in another context in one of his other previous leadership roles. Ian is a vice president in a multinational international company based in the US, and I'm going to be sort of exploring a whole load of stuff with Ian. It's going to be a conversation, of course, and I'm curious to sort of unpick and sort of sift through his career to date and try and find out how emotional intelligence has played a significant role, or has it played a significant role in Ian's career. So I suppose that's a sort of a lead into the conversation, Ian. So how much of a role has emotional intelligence played in your career to date as a leader?
That's a great question, Jim. Hi, nice to meet you and speak to you again. I guess increasingly more, right? So as a young leader or a young guy starting out in my career, wasn't very self-aware, certainly wasn't very aware of others. So very little, right? And then as you progress and do more things and get more experiences, you get exposed to some areas that expose yourself and make you self-aware and self-reflective, and then suddenly you grow into that world a little bit more. So as my career has progressed, I've been working now, more than 40 years, 43 years or so. You get more and more into this stuff, right? And then exploring it, meeting you, it was my first sort of formal exposure to it in a formal sort of workshop area with my leadership team. And then from there, just the curiosity, right, makes you go out and start reading a bit and investigating a bit. So more and more as time goes by, I guess.
I love I love curiosity. It's one of my favorite traits in leadership. So one of the thoughts I had was, okay, so if you had a leadership cookbook, what would be the key ingredients of your leadership cookbook? What would those ingredients be to be a great leader?
I think there are so many, and it's so wide. I think there's a few that really stand out to me, and they should be consistent. The first is really being very aware of your impact on others, on the culture around you, the team, how the team show up, how individuals show up. So being constantly aware, especially as the leader, you're under the spotlight all the time, right?
Yeah.
How I react in a situation, how I ignore or not walking past somebody in the corridor, how my facial expression to when something goes wrong, how I react to that. So just being absolutely 100% aware that every single thing I do is being looked at, watched, analyzed, and that can work both ways, right? Because I mean, a chance conversation in the corridor can leave a lasting impression on somebody in both a positive and a negative way. And I think as leaders, and the more senior you get, and the bigger the teams you get that you lead, it's more and more important that you're very aware of that. Many examples, both negative and positive, of where that's played very positively, and also where you think, oops, that was a mistake. I should have done that differently. So I think that's probably the first one. I guess the next page on the cookbook would be inspiring others. How do you inspire?
Yeah.
You can link that to engagement. You can link that to many other words or phrases. But at the bottom line, it's everything from framing a message to setting a vision to installing confidence in reading that vision to lighting the fire in the belly of your employees that I want to do this. We're on this road together, and I want to follow you. So I think inspiring others is really, really important. So we've got aware of your impact on the culture, inspiring others, and I guess ultimately the last one is really about individual and team performance is really a reflection on your leadership performance. So if I dig that a little bit more, there's people on my team that are not performing. That's my responsibility. I need to be helping, coaching, challenging, giving them experiences where they can develop. And ultimately, if they're not and they're not comfortable in that role, I need to find other roles for them where they can excel, using their strengths to excel. And how the team perform and how individuals on my perform is really a reflection on me. So if my team is performing well and good, then that's great for me. If they're not, then that's also for me to solve. I think that's another really important page or recipe on the cookbook.
That's interesting, because really what you're talking about there is personal responsibility. You as a leader taking personal responsibility for the results, in terms of your individuals within your team. So taking full responsibility for your impact on them and owning, because of course the buck stops with you anyway. But actually, it's a really good insight to sort of say, yeah, the individual and team performance is down to you, in terms of how you engage and inspire them as well, of course.
Yeah, you can take that to the next level, right? Because if I select people to join my team, if I'm recruiting, if I'm sponsoring somebody, if I'm coaching somebody, mentoring somebody, all of that is my choice too, right? So who I select, who I sponsor, who I develop is an important element as well. And then beyond those kind of very classic high level ones, there's some real core values you need to follow: honesty, trust, transparency, building trust in a team, being approachable, certain ethical values that you need to define. I think you need to be very clear as a leader, and especially as a young leader coming in and leading your first larger teams. What sort of behaviors are you going to accept and allow? How are you setting the scene for what's appropriate, not appropriate? And that's everything from turning up 5 minutes late to a meeting to dinners out with the guys after work. However wide you want to make that. You're the leader, and what you do will have an impact on how the team and others respond, and you need to be clear on what that is.
Yeah, you're talking about stuff that is just so, it's music to my ears to hear you say all this. I'm not surprised by it, by the way, but actually what you're talking about is giving an example of what good looks like. So you're setting the expectations early doors so that they know what levels they need to attain, to just hit the sort of the bare minimums, if you like, because these are the sort of the expectations. At least they then stand a chance of hitting those expectations if you've articulated them clearly.
Yeah, and often we don't, right? So often we get annoyed at somebody's behavior, and without self-reflecting, actually, I've never really set that standard, or I never really described that that's what I expect. So yeah, that's absolutely right. It's quite an interesting expectation setting, is really rather interesting. We spent quite some time in my current company looking at that. So, in terms of normal performance appraisals, very corporate year-end appraisals, goal setting, etc. An interesting exercise to do for yourself, and I did it just actually a couple of years ago, was to sit down and write a couple of paragraphs, what's expected of me, right? And I'm not talking about my KPIs or my goals and objectives, or I need to make this much revenue and etc. It's really what's expected of me, and the goals and objectives and the KPIs, that's given, that's my job. But what's more than that? right? So it's more about how you do that work.
Yeah.
I'm expected to be a good corporate citizen. I'm expected to promote the company. I'm expected to treat my employees well with kindness, respect, honesty, trust, transparency. You know, those sort of things that wrap around, you know, the core number, um, because that's what really makes it work, right?
Yeah.
We can all set a number up on the door. It's about how you get there that's equally as important. And if you get all that piece right, the numbers really take care of themselves.
Yeah.
But writing that, the exercise of writing it, is actually quite difficult, but very enlightening. And then if you get your team to do it, you can share them across the team. It's really quite interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I like that. I'm going to take that away with me and box it up, I'm sure. I like that. It's very powerful. And what you're talking about really is there's a number. So every organization's got a number, every team's got a hit, and every individual has a number to hit, whatever that is, whatever the role they are in. And what's interesting about all that, which I think a lot of leaders do miss, I know you are very focused on this aspect. We're human beings, so it's the human being that's going to actually achieve that number for you within the organization.
Mm.
And they are people that have got emotions and feelings, and and behave certain ways. So it's so fascinating, being able to sort of almost like, it's like being a conductor as a leader. I always think of it as that you're conducting their, supporting their performance, getting the best out of them. And you talked about coaching earlier, and I know that's a key aspect. That's one of that would definitely be in your recipe cookbook for sure, being a great coach. What I'm curious about for you is who has influenced your leadership career, throughout your leadership. Are there people that you've come across that you could say, yeah, this particular leader, could be your parents? I don't know. I'm just curious as to who has influenced that along your way.
There's many, Jim, yourself included in that list, right? So if I go back uh, all the way to very early days, so a young, I'm an electromechanical technician by education, a young engineer working for the BBC, 22 years old. I'm working in the graphic design department with a colleague, Tom. Hopefully he'll hear this. He's long retired now, but he was maybe 25, 30 years older than me. But we were good mates. He got me playing rugby at that age, and got me down the BBC Rugby Club for many years. But he was really the first influence in terms of how do you set your kind of ethical values, right? So there was a supervisor position suddenly coming up for grabs in the company, and he was encouraging me to go after this, right? Which was rather interesting as a very young, newly trained apprentice technician.
Yeah, 22
Um,
years old. I mean, you're still a young
yeah,
whippersnapper. Yeah.
absolutely. But he obviously saw something in me, which is great. I appreciate that. But it was the coaching around, the honesty, the transparency. How would I deal with a guy that's worked there 30 years as such a young guy? How would I tackle, performance issues? How would I deal with being one of the new guys to suddenly be their supervisor? So just really coaching me through a lot of that, ready for that interview, but also giving me some life experiences, right? And I think that was really, really the first major impact. And then obviously the rugby club and everything that goes around that, the camaraderie there, the team stuff there, the being captain, secretary, whatever. There's lots of leadership things you pick up along the way. Then if I jump probably a decade or a little bit more than a decade, maybe two, I'm suddenly in France working for another big multinational company, American multinational company. I'm working in France, and I was running customer training in a customer training center, and speaking to one of the top leaders there, very, very good guy. And I at that age, I'm young, 28, 27, have an opinion on everything and everybody. Probably very little self-awareness at that time, but thinking I was God's gift to the world, right? So So I'm highly opinionated. I'm, doing my work. I'm struggling to show or loving to show the success in my work, but I'm also loving to challenge others and maybe their success or not. And my manager at that time I was struggling with, and then this person I'm referring to was above that person. And we were out for dinner one evening, just chatting away, and then he said something to me that stayed to this day. And you remember right at the beginning of this podcast, I said, "A moment conversation can last forever," right? So this is
Yes.
something that's now 30 years ago or more. And he just said, "Ian, you need to ask yourself why this is so important to you," right? So I was not attacking, but maybe challenging or calling to question some of this other leader's work. And that one comment, Ian, you should look to yourself first,
Yes.
was at the time a little bit, what do you mean, right? But it stuck, and it made me think and reflect and dig a bit deeper and understand what this was all about. And that was absolutely enlightening.
Wow.
I've had the pleasure just a few years ago to meet him again, um, and remind him of that conversation and tell him that 30 years on, that still hits me. It still resonates with me, and it was a major turning point in how I saw the world, because for the first time I saw, what I was seeing was based on how I was inside
Yes.
me, and what my needs were and what my lack of awareness was driving. So that was just stunning. Still, as I think about it right now, it's just still stunning to realize how big an impact that was.
Was he surprised by that? Was he, because a lot of the time, a lot of the people that we may inspire along our way, that we bump into, might be a brief conversation. Most of the time, we are unaware of the significant impact. So, for example, it must have been nice for him to hear that story, but was he surprised by that? Because, normally you don't get that feedback. You don't ever know. You will have inspired hundreds of people that you've worked with in your career as a leader, but most of the time you don't get that. They
Mm.
don't come back along the way and say, wow, you really had a significant impact on my career, and I really want to thank
Yeah,
you for it.
yeah. I think he was surprised I remembered the conversation. I'm not sure he did, if I'm 100% honest, but he was grateful for me reminding him. But I'm not sure he was that surprised. I think
Yeah.
he was psychologically trained, a very smart leader, very emotionally intelligent leader, and I think he knew his power. Right,
Yeah.
his power
Good.
was not driving KPIs. He knew that this is what he does. He did. So I think he was pleased to hear it, but he knew he had that impact on people.
That's
Certainly.
amazing as well, given the context of the time that you're talking about, because emotional intelligence really wasn't a big deal back then. The
Yeah,
sort of the time that you're talking about. So, emotionally intelligent leader, he was a leader before his time, I guess. Because that's emotional
absolutely.
intelligence has only been around for sort of 25, 30 years. Bravo
Yeah,
to him,
yeah, absolutely.
and
Very
bravo
big
to
star.
you for getting it. And plugging it into your
Yeah,
DNA.
and I think that's then the start of being super curious, right? So, oops, wow, I understand something about myself that I never knew before. Changes my whole picture on the world. And then suddenly there's a first for it, right? Because if that's one revelation, what else can I discover along the way? And then it's just an absolute first. So an absolute first, and a real love of reflection, self-reflection, observation, trying to get under the skin of what's happening. So as you encounter other leaders, other environments, other people, just thinking a little bit deeper than what you see on the surface.
Yeah.
Just being aware to say, okay, this is showing up this way. I wonder why, right? I wonder what's behind that behavior. I wonder why that person is behaving that way in that situation. And it just helps you then realize it's more than one dimensional, right?
Of
Someone blows
course.
up in a meeting, someone gets angry or frustrated, and instead of getting scared or attacking back or criticizing or judgmental, it's just taking that few seconds to say, okay, there's something happening here. They're dealing with their emotions at that time, and this is how it's showing up. But there's a reason behind it, right? It's not with evil intent. It's not with any means to make me unhappy. This is
Yeah.
something that's in this environment. And if you just look at it that way, it helps you respond a different way, right? If someone is reacting a certain way, you tend to judge and you tend to have your opinion on how you should respond.
Mm.
But just taking a few milliseconds to think, okay, this is maybe not quite as black and white as I see, and it drives your behavior. How do I then lean into that situation?
Yeah.
How do I then help that person and help the team, me, the company, move through that? And it just gives you a deeper perspective, and I think that's a real big part of it. And then obviously I met you, Jim, through another leader that introduced you to our team, and we spent some sessions together. Then we worked together with some of my teams, and all of that, all the things you bring to the table, the EI analysis, so that all of those things just add and give depth to what you already begin to know, right, and
Mm.
begin to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's more first, right? So whether I'm on YouTube watching videos or reading books or watching a documentary on TV or reading, I don't know, a magazine in an aircraft somewhere, I'm constantly pulling ideas and thoughts in as to how I can use them. I kind of have this image of, a big bathtub that's completely empty, which I consider as my brain, if you like. And then I'm filling it up with buckets of water, and every bucket of water or cup of water is a 5-minute conversation in the corridor, or a 2-hour read of a magazine on an aeroplane, or just last week, in fact, I was on an aeroplane watching a fabulous little half an hour episode with Coach K and LeBron James, and it was
Yes.
called Chasing Greatness. And so it's about this sort of legendary college coach in the USA to probably the world's best, one of the world's best ever basketball players, LeBron James, and they're just having a conversation like this, and there were things that were coming out, which I immediately was jotting down in my book, thinking this is exactly like teamwork, performance, leadership, taking care of yourself, perseverance. There was so many nuggets in that
Yeah.
30-minute
Wow.
video. So you write it all down, and I copied the link. And in fact, this week I was with my team, and we actually reviewed that video together, and just like, what could we pull from this apart from just being a great sports analogy and lots of good sports clips? There really was some good nuggets that then you can pull into the team and build. So the inspiration comes from everywhere all the time, I guess, is the bottom line. It's just being open for it, and
Yeah.
seeing it and seeing the connections. And I see all these cups of water in my bathtub. They're all swirling around. And then suddenly one cup integrates with another cup, and then an idea comes, and it all makes sense.
Yep.
And that's really how I see the world at the minute. So.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I'm similar in my approach. I'm constantly on the lookout for new clips, new things to bring in. One of the things I saw back at Christmas time, I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, a kids animation, which is probably one of my favorite animations of late. It was the story of a little boy who was lost, and it's a story of the boy, the mole, the fox, the horse, and this boy encounters these creatures, and they're having conversations with him. And the mole actually asks him quite a profound question. He says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Which is a beautiful question. And the boy ponders it for a moment, and then he comes back to the mole and he says, "I want to be kind."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I mean, I almost cried because it was just such a profound message for the world to hear. I mean, wouldn't it be quite remarkable if everyone was just kind? I mean, what a profound message, across
Yeah.
the world, for that to trickle across the world, for everyone to just show up and be kind. I
Mm,
mean, that would evaporate all the wars and all the other bits and pieces that are going on around the world, you know, in a heartbeat. So
absolutely.
yeah, the messages are all there. It's just sometimes I think, you become aware of this throughout your career. I know, we're running so fast on the treadmill that we're just missing those messages, and we're missing those moments. And I love your point earlier about just a simple conversation in the corridor. Uh, those moments can be missed by so many leaders because
Mm,
they're in a rush to go from one, they're on a journey somewhere. They're going from A to B, and they bump into somebody and they say, "Hi, how are you?" And they say, "Yeah, yeah, not so bad." And unfortunately, most of the time they carry on walking on because they've got a meeting to get to, or
yeah,
something they're doing. But if, the more curious leader, the more in touch leader would pick up on that cue and just stop for a moment, and similar to what you've suggested, you're more conscious of the critical role those intimate conversations take place, when they take place, and
yeah.
the power of them.
I think that's really interesting. I think about it a lot because I'm traveling around a lot, and I have a certain offices where there's big groups of my team. And when I'm coming into that office, I may be a week in Brussels or a week in Manchester or wherever. Your schedule gets pretty filled up. People, lots to do, lots of meetings, lots of face to faces, and I always run out of time. And I run out of time because I prioritize the corridor walk. Right? I want to meet someone in the coffee room. I
Yes.
want to go to their desk and ask them how they're doing and spend that time. So now I build that time in, right? So even though I may have 2.5 days full meetings, I'll book another 1.5 days of gaps so that I'm enabled to have those impromptu discussions and those impromptu meetings. I think the big switch there for me is to understand, and I see this in new leaders in my team as leaders progress and get more senior and grow within the company. You mistake what your role is a little bit. So you're a producer as an individual contributor, right? You're producing stuff. Maybe even as a manager, director level, you still need to produce occasionally or produce through others, certainly. But you're in this, I'm self-producing. And in these conversations and these moments of time, they don't feel productive, right?
Yeah.
So I've spent two hours talking with half a dozen people in the coffee room. I've had 4 cappuccinos, and now I need to use the restroom. And you feel I've wasted half a day because I should have done, I had my to-do list, I had my work to get done. And you forget, and what I try to coach my team is that's actually the important work, right? Those
Yes.
moments, those 2 hours you spent are far more important than the PowerPoint deck you had to get ready, or the spreadsheet you had to complete, or of course, that's easy to say. Those things are needed as well. You still need to deliver your work. But as a leader and a senior leader, the your job is to create the next leaders, right? Your
Yes,
job
of
is to
course.
bring them and develop them and grow them. And if by doing that it means showing them through your actions and behavior that time is important. I've had people say to me, "How do you like spend so much time doing this?" And well, it's a choice, right? You have to choose to do it. No one's going to give you that time, so you
No.
have to take that time. That's the bottom line.
No, I like the idea that you actually sneak it into your diary, so you've got the opportunity to go and walk the corridor deliberately.
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of leaders wouldn't really think about doing, but it is, and I think they get caught up in, as you say, the doing of stuff, the tasks, and getting the tasks
Mm,
ticked off, as opposed to encompassing the fact that actually those conversations are critical and they are needed. And actually, the team are almost begging for a little bit of attention.
yeah.
We're sort of almost like childlike. We just want a little bit of attention and say, "Oh, hello." I
Yeah.
just
Of
want to.
course.
I want to have a conversation with you and just hear your opinion on this, or hear their opinion on something that they've been thinking about and share it with you. And it's those conversations are critical, but they're not had by most leaders, and I think that's the point that you're making. One of the questions I've got for you as well is, what are some of the memorable moments that you've had as a leader when you've developed? So coaching is a big piece of your toolkit that you bring into the conversations that you're having with your team. So tell me, and maybe share with me some of the moments where you've seen, you've deliberately been developing someone, a team member, and they've had a breakthrough. So what are some of those memorable moments for you within your career? Because you will have, I know you have had those moments because I've worked with you, but I'm curious to, explore what your thoughts are about what are some of the examples where you've had some big breakthroughs with people?
Yeah, I think there's many, right? So if I can roll that back a little bit, if we all have our individual strengths and the areas where we can excel if that strength is exercised and developed. And obviously we look at our teams and we look at our teams for potential and for progression. We're often not very good at actually orchestrating the environment for them to do that, right? So if there's someone that's really a really good producer, you tend to get them to produce more, right? And think that that's developing them. And of course, they produce more and more, and you flog the winning horse,
Yes.
and then you keep them there for 20 years doing the same job because actually you need them to do that job now because they're reducing so well. So I think the biggest first trick is to recognize the strength that you want to exercise on that person, or the development that you want them to be able to demonstrate to you. So when you've decided I'm going to sponsor someone, so this person I feel has potential, their strengths I need to explore, I really see them, they have a long runway in the company, they can be in this position in the future. You've got to create the environment for them to demonstrate that, to learn that and to demonstrate that, right? So then it's about how do I give them exposure to this whole new world, right? So very black and white. There's if you want to become a general manager or a commercial leader, but you've never been in sales, the very easy HR approach, well, they need to carry a bag for a couple of years and prove their worth in sales. Well, it's a little bit more than that, right? I mean, I think you need to, whether it's a project, whether it's working in another team, whether it's exposing them on an assignment somewhere, you need to create an environment where they can learn.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to go in and be an expert, right? And we often fail there. We plug them into a new environment and say, oh, go do, and then we leave them alone and wonder why they struggle or fail. So first of all, you have to decide it, but then you have to be willing to put the time in. And the time in is, at the beginning, you might have to be quite directive. If they're completely new to something, you may need to be really guiding them on, oh, okay, over the next couple of days, why don't you look at this and then come back and talk to me, and then we'll choose your next step. And you become quite directive. And then as they get a little bit more into it and they understand, then you can start to back off a little bit and maybe encourage them or coach them through some areas and get them to a position where they're then finding that the solutions themselves or the answer themselves, but they want to spar with you, right? They want to be sure. So they'll come to you and say, oh, I'm not sure. Can we just talk it through? Yeah, of course we can. Ask the right questions, get them to, support their choice and feel confident. And I think the beauty, you asked for examples. I mean, there's so many, but the beauty is when suddenly they do it on their own, right? Yeah. I've been in situations, and it's still even today, where suddenly somebody who's reporting to me, we've been through the direction, we've been through the high coaching, we've been through the encouraging, because now I know what I don't know, so I'm scared. And then every decision needs to be talked about. And then suddenly, a month goes by, and I think, oh, what happened there? And I say, what happened a month ago? And then I get the story of the things they've done or implemented, or how they responded, and it was all independent. They needed no sparring with me, no advice from me, no checking off, is it okay? I guess part of that is creating the trust environment that they can go and do that and fail and make mistakes. But when they get to that level of self-sufficiency, if you like, that they can go off and make their own choices and will be supported in doing so, it's just, I can imagine, yeah, it's just like watching your child get their graduation, right? It's you're the proud, sounds corny, you're the proud dad watching his children, but it's really them, and you've seen them get to that level.
Yeah, that
That's
is
just
cool.
wonderful, right?
What you're
And then I
talking. Yeah, sorry, I was just interrupting, because what you're really talking about there is a concept that I know you get and a lot of leaders don't necessarily get, is instead of giving them a fish, you're teaching them how to fish and where to
mm,
fish and what line to use and what bait to use and what season is a good season to fish in, etc., and where the good
yeah,
spots are, as opposed to just you get caught in that trap. A lot of leaders get caught in that trap of giving them a fish every day because it makes them feel good that they have the answers, and that person doesn't get developed. So that's a beautiful, that story alone is just a beautiful story around developing someone and then almost letting them free, which
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I
So
mean, ultimate feedback is that other teams, other departments, other leaders want your people, right? I mean, that's that's the ultimate. Hey, when a position, a promotion comes up, it's a natural choice. It's that person, and
yes.
then it's like job done, right? And then you see them fly. That's just wonderful.
Some leaders do get a little bit nervous about developing their team, because then of course they then move on, so they then have to replace that individual, so that can be a real blocker for some leaders. What's your thought on that specific aspect, Ian? Although I'm
I see that. Yeah, I see that two ways. So a KPI I would give myself would be exporter of talent, right?
Yeah,
Because my
okay.
job is to create the next leaders. So if I am creating the next leaders, that's a reflection on me. I said right at the beginning, one of the expectations of me is who I sponsor and develop is a reflection on myself. So if these people are getting promoted or getting pinched by other people, fantastic. It's
Yeah,
about them. It's not about me and my productivity. So that's just ultimate feedback that good job, or good job in selecting the right person, and good job on the person for making it and being that good at what they do. But then it's also an opportunity for me to bring in the next one, right? So I have
yes,
the opportunity then to backfill into that role, maybe change dynamics in the team with something else, and it's just a constant feed. I remember when I was an apprentice, I started life as an apprentice technician. And it was very normal in those days when you got your signed apprenticeship papers, 5 years doing your apprenticeship. Everybody knew that when you finished your apprenticeship, within the first couple of years, you would change job,
yep.
because you got a salary hike, you went somewhere else, and just spent 5 years being abused in the apprenticeship. So, but it was known across all companies, all manufacturing companies knew that their apprentices would rotate, right? But you have that's just how it is, right? That was normal and expected, and people lived into it. And I know that if my leaders become good and I can get them there, that they'll need to keep growing. The worst thing in the world is to have a really high potential person blocked in a role because their leader or their function that they do is so important that you're scared to let them go. That's how sad that is.
Yeah,
That's something we need to fight against.
and I think that does happen. I see that a lot in teams where a leader has done a phenomenal job of building an exceptional team, but those people are not then being pulled elsewhere in the
Hmm.
organization to fill the new vacancies of people retiring from other senior positions. So yeah, really
It's
critical
hard
piece.
though. It's hard. It's hard work, right? I mean,
Oh
If
yeah.
one of my key people leave, my first reaction is fantastic for them. The second reaction is, oh my God,
Yep.
I've got to start again, right? I've got to bring someone in. I've got to recruit. I'm not that good at recruiting.
Yep.
So do I choose right? And most people are not good at recruiting. Do I get a good candidate? Do I get what I want? Am I ready to invest the time
Mm.
it takes? And the answer ultimately is yes, of course. But it's your first reaction is, oh God, right, here we go again. I have to start again.
It's interesting that you pick on that piece of recruiting, because I've just recently, one of the most recent podcast interviews I've done is with a lady that was in marketing, then she went to HR, and now she's a coach. And as a coach in Canada, she is now she uses emotional intelligence to help recruit for new leaders. So it's not something that's really sort of gained traction in the corporate world significantly. And I read a book some months ago, a couple of years ago now. It's not the how, the what, it's the who. And this book was all about recruiting the right people. So this was written from a recruiting guru, if you like, from America.
Yeah.
And talked about using EI specifically. So of course they're going to have their CV, they're going to have their career, and they're the things that they're green box, they're almost green lights. Yes, they've got those aspects. So they're the right person on paper, but more critically, how are they when they show up in interview? What is their how they hold themselves, and I'm sure you're pretty good at that aspect, but it's that almost out trumps the CV, that is becoming so much more important. And so much so, interestingly, I did a walk last weekend for prostate cancer. It was a marathon from Wembley to Wycombe Wanderers football team, their site as well. And I met the QPR manager, Gareth Ainsworth, and I was stunned and really excited to hear the way he was talking about leadership and how he sets the expectations, how he sits with each of the new players that join the team around the expectations, and talks about the values, etc. And I was just blown away by just how knowledgeable he was. I suppose I was surprised, although of course mindset does play a big role. But then when I think about footballers, a lot of them aren't that emotionally intelligent, but actually the manager was. So of course they're trying to instill some of that in their team members, their players, and I was left with a sort of a spring in my step, thinking, oh, there's hope still, that actually, someone's out there that's doing is a good example of what good looks like from a management perspective in that world of football. Because of course there are lots of stories surrounding footballers that aren't particularly great, currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think you mentioned the word mindset for me there, Jim. That resonated on two levels. There's kind of three questions I want answered when I'm looking to recruit someone, right? Can you do the job?
Yes.
And I'm not interested on your degree level or your master's or your whatever. I want to hear about experiences or situations you've been in that would demonstrate your capability. Now, there, of course, with skill, there needs to be a certain level of skill required, right? If you're a footballer, you can't be terrible at football and still become a footballer, however good your mindset is. You need to have a certain minimum level.
Yeah.
But then it's about, any other skill or can be learnt and can be honed and can be improved. So it's more about the mindset and the attitude, right? And whether that would trump a long list of qualifications means nothing if you can't apply it, and you can't apply it in the right way, and you can't work with other colleagues, and you can't work across teams, and all of that becomes meaningless unless you're going to sit in a dark room somewhere and work on your own. Right? So can you do the job? Tell me. Don't talk to me of your CV or demonstrate to me. Then the second one really is your engagement for working here, right? So what's lighting the fire in your belly? And I think that engagement or motivation theory is pretty simple, right? We obviously have an external need, which is our salary, our position, especially if you're early in your career, you bought your new house and you just got married and got 3 kids. I mean, there is a very practical
Yeah, there's some
need,
key drivers
right?
there, some key
Uh,
drivers.
I need some bucks to pay my bills, um, and a nice work environment and company car or whatever that is. So there is something to fulfill there. So you need to understand that a little bit. But the most important, the bigger or equally as important part is what's inside your belly, right? Is this going to light the fire? Is this
Yeah,
going to get you out in the morning excited, or are you just coming in, checking in and checking out 8 hours later? Are you committed and passionate about this, and what makes this attractive to you? I really want to understand that for them, because that, for me, that would trump probably most of the other stuff. And then the last bit really is that expectation of winning. You need winners, right? You need people that want to achieve, do well, set themselves goals and targets and work towards them, put the effort in, and they're doing that because it's their passion and they're
yeah,
driven by that, and it lights the fire in the belly. And yes, of course, because they need to pay the bills.
yeah.
But it becomes pretty miserable if it's only about paying the bills. It's
Of
not,
course.
if it's
Yeah, of
not
course.
with the other stuff as well, right? And then of course there's a team element here as well. So can they do the job is question one. Question two is how engaged are they about it? And question three would be, do they fit in
Yeah,
my team? And that really is about, how do I sense their personality and how do I sense how they would react with others? That relationships and building relationships cross teams, cross functions, cross the world is so important, and so important for their success going on, that it needs to be right. So you need to have a good feel that, yes, this person is going to work in my team. And the fit, by the way, may not mean they're all the same as us. It's more likely to mean, that's quite opposite to someone else in my team, and I
yeah,
want that dynamic, because I want them to pull a little bit against each other,
yeah,
because somewhere in the middle there, it's going to be even better than
yeah, of
going one way or
course.
the other.
That's a really powerful point. It's sort of the thing that we talk about in Lencioni's model, which is the healthy conflict as opposed to, unhealthy conflict, destructive conflict.
Yeah.
So, getting differing opinions, differing views, that's great. That's fantastic. That's what you want. And you
Yeah.
want to cultivate those brains in the room, around the team, instead of it just being the leader's perspective. Let's include everyone in that process and get the dialogue going, because that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's the alchemy, really, in a way. And
Yeah.
I suppose that's the alchemy of leadership in a sense, is your ability to pull that together, to invite them to feel comfortable to have the conversations that they need to have, because most people don't feel comfortable to have the conversation in the first place. They're worried about what they might say and how that might be used against them outside of the room.
You've got to build that trust, right? And
Yes.
trust amongst the team. It's all about evolving the best solution. If you're having a healthy debate about something, it's all about getting to a better place than one person. The worst thing you can have is a very self-assured, directive leader, and everybody's following like lemmings behind them, because you're not getting the best out of your team. You're not exploring the best solution. It's an easy route, and it could be a disastrous route, right? You're just losing the opportunity to get much more out of it. But if people feel safe, they can have that debate. It's with no hidden agenda. It's all about getting to the next place. Then, yeah, you're, by definition, your outcomes are at a different level.
And that trust piece is just the critical piece. It's the foundational level of Lencioni's model that I've spoken to you and your team about in the past. And it's the piece that can be quite tricky, and that hinges on your ability, and I know you do this really well, your ability to actually engender that trust. So you're inviting that trust by, asking their views, asking their opinions, but then you're not then going doink no, I don't, doink, that's not acceptable. You're encouraging the conversation. But I see so often though, Ian, I see leaders, they sort of attempt to clumsily invite the conversation or someone's view or perspective, but then they get crunched and say, yeah, no, there, yeah, sort of like there, that's not appropriate here.
Just do this anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like, okay, so you don't really want us to speak the truth. So they then get conditioned into not speaking the truth.
Yeah. The hard thing there is giving yourself time to do it, right? Like all people, we want to coach, we have good intentions to coach, we have good intention for these healthy debates, but time's running, I've got a pressure, I've got to get to the next meeting, okay, let's do this, right? Or you step in and take over. It happens to everybody. You need to fight it as much as you can. There was a good colleague that we've worked with for many years that raised something quite fun that I've used a few times quite recently. So if any of my team watch this, they'll smile to themselves. They'll know. I had someone come to me. They'd been working on a proposal for an alternative system that we wanted to implement, and they had their nice PowerPoint plan of why this was better than the old one or whatever, and they were ready to present it. And I said, well, before you come and present it to me, I also want you to present the two other options that you turned down in preference to this. And he looked at me like a like a deer in the headlights. It's like, what other two? What other two ones? Like, exactly.
Great point.
But just go back and unpack with the team again. What would make what other ones would we turn down?
Yes.
Investigate a bit further.
Yeah. Test it in the fire. Yeah.
What data would make this not work? What data would make it better? And just really, but you have to have the time, right? We're on a bit of a deadline. We need to make a decision. And it's like, okay, we'll put it off another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Go back and do a bit more, basically.
Yeah, I like that.
And it's hard to force yourself to do it, but it really does create the right healthy debate and the right investigation. So
well, but it could also save thousands, if not millions, of pounds in the long run.
Absolutely.
By taking that extra time. But it goes back to your, the thing that we've already mentioned, that some people are so on the treadmill of, next, that these things get looked over, which is a real shame.
Absolutely.
Okay, a question I've been really keen to ask you, and it's been on the edge of my tongue for a while now. So what leadership book would you take on your leadership desert island? So you're on a desert island, that's it. It's just you. No, you're not there with anyone else. But what book would you take? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a leadership book, to be fair, Ian. It could be anything that you think has been a significant book that's had an impact on you, that would keep you company while you're on this desert island, hoping for someone to come and rescue you at some point. But it could be years.
It would have to be a book that would dig into me, make me think about me, right? So I think
well, you've got time to self-reflect.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I mean, read a book once and get what you like out of it is not going to be helpful if you're going to be stranded for a while, right? I would want a book that would constantly make me reflect on my life to date, situations, how I responded, how family responded, how colleagues responded, what would I do differently now if I could, what did I learn from that? Something that would keep your brain active basically for that period of time. One book that obviously jumps to mind is it's an old classic now, but the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Stephen Covey. That I remember reading that for the first time. There was so much in that book if you really take time to read it and do the exercises and reflect. There's so much in that book that is relevant for your personal life, your work life. So that's always a good one. And every time, I mean, occasionally I'll watch the odd video clip on YouTube, even today, to remind myself on some of the concepts in there. I mean, it's a classic, but it's very will make you dig into yourself very well. So.
That's it. I'm pleased you brought it up, because I was going to ask you about the 7 habits, because I know you, I'm not quite sure whether you got yourself qualified, but I know you've done some of the 7 habits training. Bless him, I know Stephen Covey passed away some years now. It must be coming up to 10 years ago. Goodness me.
Yeah.
And his son, Sean, continues to beat that drum of that business, but he also has gone off on a sort of a divergent. He's co-written a book, which was the 4 disciplines of execution. A really powerful book.
Yeah.
So the 7 habit stuff, you know, that was one of the first things you said in this podcast when we started, was seek first to understand. You were talking about self, you know, self-exploration, you know, so that was your discovery. That was the big aha. And really one of the key aspects of your early learning from one of your mentors, they got you to look at, you know, well, why are you doing that? Why are you acting and behaving? Why are you asking that question about other people? You need to have a look at yourself, which is the mirror work. You know, it's the stuff that you and I have spoken about in earlier times when we've worked together. You know, doing the work on yourself, the mirror work, you know, asking yourself that question of, okay, so what have I either done or not done to create this pattern of behavior in this particular individual? So out of a load of the things you've done, because I was saying before we came on live that you're one of few leaders that I've come across in the 20 odd years that I've been working as a coach that has done a significant chunk of development work, self-development, and then you've taken that and sprinkled it in across your teams that you've worked with in your career. So I know you've done some 7 habit stuff. I know you worked with me, but you know, what is it that's made you contemplate that and then actually say, okay, yes, this is a chunk of the budget needs to be invested in this stuff. So, obviously because you believe in it, but you know, so was there? I'm just trying to get to the essence of, you do that more than most leaders. So help me understand that a little bit.
I like it. I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So
I mean, bottom line, no, I think the day-to-day at work, right? We can all dig in and get more skilled at our work, do a master's degree, go on I don't know, pivot table course. Or I mean, you can always hone your skills, and you should, right? A footballer doesn't stop honing his technical skills. That's important. But technical skills alone are not good enough. It's the balance of the technical skills and how you go about doing that, right? So if I think about, you know, bigger projects, larger organizations to manage, the skill of aligning multicultural teams to a direction, the skill of engaging that team to follow you on that inspirational journey, the skill of executing on that journey in nice segments, the skill of building that trusted environment where you can debate and challenge each other and come up with an even better solution. Without those, your technical skills will get you nowhere.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to hear your conversation with the QPR manager. One, because I'm a QPR fan. I grew up just 500 yards from the stadium for all my youth.
They're playing tonight, by the way.
Yeah, well, I don't watch them anymore. I live in Denmark, but yeah, no, I used to go to every game in Shepherd's Bush for many years. But hearing what he said about putting expectations in, I have a colleague who works with me now. One of his younger children is in a football academy, and you know, it's quite ruthless. Like, you select what you think are necessarily the best players for the football academy. Well, in fact, no. Right. So talking to the coaches there, you know, some kids are getting through and they're not the best players, but they have the right mindset. They have the right attitude. You know, and the coach's discussion with him was, you know, we can teach the skills. If you have a talent, we just need to hone your talent or your strength in those technical skills, and we can do that. What we can't teach is the mindset and the attitude. So that's what will get them through, rather than, because the dedication and the mindset to be able to get to the level you're aspiring to do, to get into an academy, will outweigh the other stuff. And of course, you have to have a minimum standard of skill set, but the mindset and attitude takes you to the next level. So in terms of leadership in my teams, it's a subject area that really interests me. So one is curiosity and first to learn it myself. The second is a recognition or realization that without those aspects in leaders and individuals, with those aspects in leaders and individuals, you will achieve much more. It will be greater. I'm not saying you can't be successful without. Of course you can. All the things we've discussed today, things would work without the approaches that we've been discussing. But I think it works better when you put it together. Simple as that.
It's interesting. Yeah, they do work, but not as well long term. So they can work short term, but not long term. And you know the data pretty well as well around all this stuff, Ian, because not only have I shared it with you, but I know you've done a lot of reading around this topic. And it is true that actually, to be an exceptional leader, you do have to have the technical skill. You do have to have the motivation to use that technical skill and bring it to the workplace. But you have to have the emotional intelligence to then be able to interact with others and engage and inspire your team. So they are the bits that we sort of talk about here. One of the other bits that I sort of, you've already answered actually in an earlier question in terms of how do you motivate and inspire your team. I think you've pretty much covered that. Although you may have some more to add. So why don't I just, before I brush that aside as a question that I think you've answered, let me just ask you it again. What is it specifically that you do to motivate and inspire your team? I mean, I know, I picked up the walk around thing. That's critical. And I think a lot of leaders would miss that as something that is inspiring and motivating for your team members.
Yeah.
But I mean, what other bits do you use?
It's about belief, right? So I think so a lot of our strategies, visions, plans over 5 years, long-term strategies, they're pretty complex and pretty boring, right? When you pin it down, new product introductions, expansions into new markets, so we need to get better in our back office on XYZ. I mean, like everybody's falling asleep, right? So 15 hours later in a 4-day strategy workshop. So I think one element of that is the simplification of a really complex story, and the whole storytelling piece of how do you transmit this 94-page document of your your A to Z strategy into a 30-minute inspiring, exciting snippet that's going to get people wanting more, right?
Yeah.
So
okay.
I think there's a skill of, when you go back to school, I remember in the English literature classes having to read different books, Jane Austen or whatever, and having to come back and write half a page on the book. And how can you dissect 640 pages into half a paragraph? But that work forces you to get really good at tracing down what really matters.
Yeah.
So I think first stage would be really how do I take a very complex issue into something that's quite easy to understand, far much more simplified, and tells a story. So the context of the story that pulls us in. So that's one piece that's important. And people will say, well, that was a great presentation, very inspiring, very exciting. You make it look so natural. It's not. I mean, it takes weeks and weeks and weeks and hours of cutting it down, practicing, getting it right. And it looks easy, but it's not. And people who think they can just swan up and do a 30-minute, that's just rubbish, right? You need to work at it. So that's an effort, but it's a well worth effort. So communicating a complex story simply and building a story that takes them on a journey. So that's the exciting piece, right? And then it's the belief that you can get there. It's no good sitting there and talking about reaching the moon. if all I have is a step ladder, right?
Yeah.
So how do I show that this is achievable? How can I demonstrate that we're going to make it, or that we're on the journey to make it? Maybe I don't have the answers all the way to the top of the mountain, but I can get us to base camp, right? How do I show that that's happening and we're progressing on that journey? So there's that belief. And then so your story, your simplified story, the belief, hopefully is igniting the passion in the belly and people want to follow you, right? Then there's other pieces. So that's the kind of core recipe, I would say. And then around that, I would build in things like a positivity, or like, you own this, right? So I've often seen leaders, maybe you have to share a sad story. Maybe you have to look at downsizing. We're going to have to it's going to be a tight year next year. We have to do X, Y, Z. How do you frame that message? How do you tell that message? And, I've seen really poor leadership with people saying, it's not me. My boss told me I need to do this. I mean, you own it. You're their leader. You're the one they're looking for. You're the one that you've asked them to follow for the last X months, weeks, years. So you own it, right? And you own framing that message, setting that message, and making it palatable for them. I think one piece of that for me is, we talk about change a lot. It's a requirement in life. People normally are very scared of change. Humans, we like stability, but if we have stability, that is just in nature, that is certain death, right? If you think about the seasons and trees and flowers, right, there's change all the time, and the change provides growth and new growth and continued life. So change is something we should embrace. But of course, when change comes, we're scared. So our first reaction is maybe anger, denial, fear. But over time, you can go through that change curve and see opportunity and come out the other side, and normally in an even better place than you started. So I often talk about that change curve can be 6 months, 9 months, 4 years. But with training and understanding yourself and your own emotions and how you deal with things, you can squeeze that change curve into 20 seconds or a couple of minutes or half an hour, right? So I know there's things that can happen to me at work, even now. Well, it will hit the anger mark and the annoying mark and the denial mark, but I know it, and I know myself, and I know my reaction, and I know I'm going through my process. So I can come off the phone, walk away from the screen, talk it through in my head, start to see the opportunity earlier, and then start to come out the other side. And if you can get that honed as a skill into the few seconds, few minutes, maybe even wait till the next morning, whatever, compared to hunkering down and being annoyed about it, that's a really good element. So I think, simplifying the message, storytelling, getting into the belly of each individual, and motivating them that way. And then, of course, if all that goes together, and you are seen as someone they trust and honest and transparent, they'll follow you, right? And you can go together.
And that takes time as well. So that last point that you made, so they'll follow you. That's if they trust you, and etc. The trust building piece is a significant part of it, and that will take a new team member or a team time to be get it. One of the phrases that I've used over in my career, get it, so that it's ingrained in their thinking, so that they actually really truly do believe that that's the case. Very powerful. I mean, in essence, what you're talking about in all of that is making one of the beautiful things of being in that privileged position as a leader is making the invisible visible. So it is VUCA sort of is the over umbrella arching thing around all organizations globally. And VUCA for the UK prior to COVID was Brexit. So we were all running around going, Brexit, and then COVID slapped us about, and that was a global VUCA moment. You know, we were vulnerable, it was uncertain, it was complex, and it was ambiguous, and no one really knew what was going on and how we should handle this. And it was real chaos for a period of time until they sort of started to create a bit of awareness. So visibility started to become clear about, you know, the processes that we had to follow, the protocols that we had to follow, masks, washing our hands, you know, all those things, getting jabs for those people that had the jabs. And, you know, it was interesting. But VUCA is something that is a constant in your world as a leader. There's always going to be another curveball that lands that you then have to take and create some, going from invisible, like everyone's going, okay, I don't see how this is going to work, to then creating that awareness. And you've just beautifully sort of shared your sort of ingredients of how to motivate and inspire by storytelling, really. You know, your ability to, you know, condense the 94-page document into a sort of a half an hour story, compelling story that's either inspirational or using maybe some, you know, something that might be sad or whatever, but taking that and blending it into and scripting a story of, okay, this is how it's a journey and we're on it together, and, you know, let's strap in and get excited, and, you know, we'll get there, you know. So
absolutely,
which is really lovely, really lovely. I think I could talk another couple of hours. I know you've got a schedule to get back to. And luckily for me, I'm actually going to sneak off and play golf this afternoon if the weather holds up. So fingers crossed that I'm going to be able to play a round of golf later this afternoon. But one of the questions I just really want to finish with, Ian, if that's okay, is that we've talked about new leaders. What I'm interested in is, so what are the tips? What are some of the tips that you would, you know, give to a new leader? So, you know, a new leader perhaps that's coming into your team, what would be the tips that you could give them that would be the nuggets to help them accelerate their leadership experience?
I think I'll pull on my own experience as a young leader, looking back now. Some of the things I did or didn't do at that time. I think be very humble. I guess there's two angles to this. So one, if the leader is coming from within the group, so let's say you're someone in the group that's now elevated above your peers, there's a different set of tips for that one than there would be for the other one, right? If you're coming in from external, nobody knows who you are. You know, be humble. Don't talk about your previous work. Really get to know the team. Be super respectful of the work they've done to get them where they are today. You're going to have to make your assessments on what needs to change, if anything needs to change, and how you want to bring things in. But you need to build that and establish that trust in you first with your team, and understand where they are and where they feel they need to go. Because if you're going to come in and set a new direction pretty quickly, I mean, there may be there's a few books on this and different approaches. You know, a lot of big companies, especially multinational companies, are very much into the 30, 60, 90-day plan, right?
Yes.
So get points on the board early, all that sort of chest beating stuff. You know, I think there's elements of that you need to take. Of course, you need to make some quick assessment, but it's not about getting points on the board. It's about being successful for the long run, right? So for me, really understand. Be humble. Don't say, in my old job I did this, in my old job we did it this way, that's better, because you're just degrading all the work. Remember, that company got to where it was without you, and they're actually doing okay. So yes, they brought you in for whatever reason, and you may have to make changes, and that's fine, but do it respectfully. I guess that would probably be my biggest tip for them. And then seek your best buddies at work. You're going to need people to spar with. That may be in other functions, other leaders, other divisions. Who is your team working with on a daily basis? You need to make those connections. You can't sit in your silo. Your job will be to formulate groups around you. So that reach out and understanding on the broader organization and the broader leadership team across other functions is equally as important. So you need to invest time in that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good spot, and a really good piece for new leaders to take on, because so many don't. They get, entrenched in their lane. They stay in that lane and they don't look outside of their lane. And actually, sometimes it's important to stay in your lane. There are times when you should stay in your lane and pipe down, but actually that point specifically about getting the connections of the people that you work closely with, that's so critical. You're talking about the relationship map that we sometimes unpack when we're working with a team. Sort of draw the me in the middle, and then all the relationships that you have, and the ones that you've got close relationships are close with you, but the ones that you've got distance. So how do you improve those connections and bring them closer to you so that they're stronger, more robust?
Yeah, and you got to build that, because the credibility. If you come out and say, "I've got a great plan, we need us all to do this," but you've not made those connections, you've not built credibility with them, you've not established some sort of connection. It's very easy to be passive as a receiver of that, right? Yeah. Yes, I'll help you, but are they really on board with you? So setting your story, your mission, your vision, and getting them really bought in and not just nodding along is key. But otherwise, you'll just fail. There'll be too many priorities on the other end that will distract from it.
Well, look, I've had an absolute pleasure. I've got so many more questions I'd love to ask. Maybe it's an opportunity to perhaps come back on another session at some point in the future, Ian, because there's still so much I haven't really dug into. I'm curious as to how you cope with the hundreds of emails that you get, and how you allocate time to that and how you sift through that, and there's loads of other aspects as well. So maybe another episode at some point in the future would be amazing, to just sort of dig into some real life experience. And I'm really grateful, by the way, for you devoting some time for us to be able to have this conversation. So thank you, and have a spectacular weekend when you get there.
Enjoy your golf. Take a few extra balls with you.
Yeah. Thanks ever so much, Ian.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at the EI Guru, and you can get more information from my website, theeiguru.com. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.